Hi, my name's Andrew Learmonth. I'm the Flight Training Manager at Remote Aviation Australia, and in this video I'm going to show you CASA's app Can I Fly There, which is actually a very good tool to help your awareness of the different types of airspace and how it can affect your RPA operations. What I'll do is I'll take you through what some of the pros and cons are of using this software and give you a few examples of how it can show you how to comply with the rules. Before I go too much further, there's a few different versions you can look at for this app. This is the web-based app that we've looked at, which you can get through the CASA website. So you just go to casa.gov.au, and then if you go down to drones, and then if you go down to the drone app, you can see that there's actually options available for Android, iOS, as well as the internet or through a normal web page, and that's what I'm using for this one here. I'm using the web app. I also use the App Store app a fair bit on my iPhone and my iPad. Quite useful when you're out on the field. I don't like it quite as much as the web app. I just find it's a little bit buggy. Sometimes it has difficulty finding your position, so I do like the web app a lot better. Now, the Can I Fly There app, it's been around now for about 6 months at the time that I've made this video. At the start, I didn't like it. I found there was a lot of inaccuracies, particularly with the rule sets they were applying, as well as, I guess, where aerodromes and different bits and pieces were. To CASA's and their web developers' credit, they've improved it a lot, and the current version I think is excellent. There are a few little flaws that I'll make you aware of as we go through it, but overall I think it actually is a really good tool for you to use. The first thing I want to point out is the terms and conditions. Now, the very first time you go into using the app, there will be a box that pops up. You have to read through it and either accept the conditions or decline it. If you decline it, you can't use any of the software. Because I've already accepted it before, I'll show you how to get it. Through this little icon here, it opens up the menu, and this is how you can access all information available to you, such as different rules, the glossary, but the thing I want to look at now is the terms and conditions. It gives you a fair bit of information about your privacy and the data they'll collect, but a couple of things I do want to point out is the third-party content. Basically, the CASA app, it gains information from third parties such as the various emergency services departments around the countryside. So this information then filters through to the app to try and make you aware of what emergency services operations might be happening at the time. However, they don't actually confirm that this data will be correct or accurate, so there is a little bit of disclaimer there. Likewise, there's further disclaimers about the information that is available through the app, so do take a bit of time to read, in particular section number 6 here. What it does point out is that this information is really designed for recreational and excluded category RPA operators. As a result, if you're a certified operator, you might actually be able to operate closer to aerodromes or in restricted airspace, that sort of thing. Obviously, if you've got the necessary approvals or permissions or it's written to your operations manual. So what this shows to you as a certified operator might not actually reflect what you can and cannot do. However, it's aimed mostly at the recreational and excluded operators. The other thing too is it doesn't actually exempt you from complying with the relevant regulations. It says you're still responsible for understanding those requirements and ensuring your operations fully comply with them. This is probably one of the considerations when using this app. It only talks about airspace, so it'll only look at your operations near aerodromes, near restricted areas, and also airspace surrounding emergency services operations. What it doesn't take into consideration is any local laws, such as restrictions when operating near national parks or local council rules. It also doesn't take into account things like populous area rules or the 30 meters, staying 30 meters away from people. So you need to actually consider the full rule set and not just rely on this app alone. And that's what they're really trying to make you aware here. To be honest, I think it'd be almost impossible for them to throw every single rule there is into the one app. So CASA have done a pretty good job here, making you aware of the airspace issues when operating your drone. Now that we've looked at the various disclaimers and terms and conditions, actually I have to accept it again, down the bottom here. And I'll show you how to recenter where you are so you can get a bit of an understanding of the airspace surrounding you. So there's a few different options available to you. If you know where you are or want to look at a particular location, you can move around the map. And if you're using the computer, you can just use the right mouse click on a particular location, and it gives you some information. So I've just picked a random spot near Kenmore, and it's actually told us that it's a pretty good location to fly. There's not a lot of restrictions there at all. However, if I fly somewhere else, and I'm just using my left mouse to hold down as I scroll around. So here I am near Archerfield, which is a controlled airport. If I drop my pin here, it tells me that it's a no-fly zone and gives me the few reasons. Another option available to you is if you know the specific location, you can actually type it in up here. So I'm just going to type in the suburb of Wynnum, which is near Brisbane, and you can see it's relocated me there. And it's giving me some information about some various helicopter landing sites. So there are a few different ways to navigate around this. I'm going to keep using this map because I think it's going to be easiest for you to see as I talk you through it, but there are also satellite options available to you, which might be useful as well. But I'm going to go back to the map view. What we'll look at now is your operations near controlled aerodromes. So if you've partaken in one of our courses or you've had a look at some CASA literature, you might be aware that now you cannot operate within 3 nautical miles of the movement area of a controlled aerodrome. And what a controlled aerodrome is, that's an airport that is managed by an air traffic controller. So it's a lot of your major airports like Brisbane Airport or Sydney Airport, but also a lot of secondary airports such as Archerfield, Moorabbin, Bankstown. And then you've got your regional centres too, like Rockhampton, Mackay Coffs Harbour. They've all got controlled aerodromes located at those various locations. So we said we can't operate within 3 nautical miles of the movement area of a controlled aerodrome. And what I mean by movement area, it's anywhere basically an aircraft can taxi on the ground. So aprons, taxiways, parking positions, as well as the runways itself, it needs to apply that 3 nautical mile boundary too. If we have a look at Brisbane Airport here, what they've done is they've, to the best that they could, they've applied that 3 nautical miles from all the different movement areas at Brisbane Airport, and that shows up as a red shaded area. So basically anywhere within that 3 nautical miles, we can't fly if we're excluded RPA or a recreational RPA. Let's say I wanted to operate in a nudge area, right mouse click there, and it's confirming it. It's telling me it's a no-fly zone, and it's giving me a few reasons why. It says you must not fly within 5.5 kilometers of the movement area of the airport unless your drone weighs less than 100 grams, so it's a really tiny micro drone, or you're complying with your REOC procedures, you're an REPL holder, basically you're a certified operator. If you're a certified operator, you may have approval to operate there. Next, we'll have a look at operations near a non-controlled aerodrome, and for this example, I want to look at Redcliffe Airport, and we'll look at some of the limitations of this software. I'll zoom right in on Redcliffe here. For operations near a non-towered aerodrome such as Redcliffe Airport, the app does 2 things. As you can see, there's this red no-fly area, and that's all based on avoiding approach and departure paths, which I'll show you shortly. The other thing it'll do as well is it will draw the 3 nautical mile ring, and that's all in line with the new legislation, or changes to the legislation, which explained you have to land your RPA if there's an aircraft movement at that aerodrome and you're within 3 nautical miles of that aerodrome. So as an example, if I was to drop my pin in the North Lakes area, it's going to give me that information. And it says what I said there, you must not launch within 5.5 kilometers, otherwise known as 3 nautical miles. We can actually see the apps crash there, it's interesting. Alright, so I'll drop my pin again. Gives me the information. So it says because you're within 3 nautical miles or 5.5 kilometers, if you are aware or become aware that manned aircraft are operating to or from this aerodrome or helicopter landing site, you must land as soon as maneuver away safely and land as soon as it is safe to do so. So that complies with the direction that was put out in October 2017 about operations near aerodromes. So that's all good and well. If you were out in North Lakes area, as soon as you became aware of an aircraft taking off or landing at the aerodrome, you would have to land your RPA. But the other thing is, let's say that you're in the Rothwell area, right here, you drop the pin, it actually says you're a no-fly zone. And the reason why you're in the no-fly zone is because you're in the approach and departure path of a non-controlled aerodrome. What I'm going to do now is just pop up an image that shows you CASA's advice about how to avoid approach and departure paths of non-controlled aerodromes. And you can see in this picture here, it's actually drawn in black. So this comes from an advisory circular. You can find it in advisory circular 101-01 and advisory circular 101-10. And these advisory circulars are aimed at excluded RPA as well as certified ops. But you may want to use these approach and departure paths for your recreational flying as well, because that's what the app is doing. Now, if you have a look at this picture, what actually happens is this no-fly area for depicting the approach and departure paths actually stretches out to 7 kilometers. If I switch back to the app now and have a look, you can see that the approach and departure path is highlighted in red, but it's actually a little bit different to CASA's actual advice. This, from what we've worked out, this actually only stretches out nowhere near the 7 kilometers I was talking about. The 7 kilometers would actually take you out here, out near the Bruce Highway. So the departure and approach paths that are being depicted in this app are different from the advice that CASA gives you in the advisory circular. So if you were to apply a more conservative approach to flying, I would go by the diagrams that I showed you just before. But any sort of advisory circular, even this app, is advice only. So it's just one of those little kind of like grey areas or little inconsistencies between, I guess, the other guidance material that CASA gives you to how to comply with the legislation, as well as what's in this app here. The other thing to consider is your operations near helipads. So this is Redcliffe Hospital here, and there's a helipad on Redcliffe Hospital. And it's very common to find helipads at hospitals, so if you're operating anywhere near a hospital, you just need to be aware of these rules. Now, the 3 nautical mile restriction also applies to helipads. It's not just aerodromes. So you can see there's a 3 nautical mile ring around it. And if I was to drop a pin just here at Woody Point, it's going to give me advice about Redcliffe Hospital, again telling me to land as soon as I become aware that an aircraft, or in this case a helicopter, has taken off or landed from the aerodrome. Close that down for the moment. The other thing you'll notice around the helipad though is this red circle. Now what this red circle is depicting is the approach and departure path for the helicopter landing site. And CASA basically said this is a no-fly zone. This matches up with another diagram I'm going to show you now. This again comes from CASA's advisory circular, the same advisory circular that contains those departure and approach paths that I showed you before. And you can see that there's actually a black ring around it, and it depicts, that's based on a 500 meter radius. Going back to the app, what was that black ring is actually depicted in red in the app here. And what they're saying is they don't want you to fly anywhere within that 500 meter radius, because by doing so, they consider you to be in the approach and departure path of the helicopter landing site, and that you could also be creating an obstruction to any aircraft operating there. So that's how the app depicts, first of all, controlled aerodromes, and we looked at the Brisbane Airport example. Then we looked at non-controlled or non-towed aerodromes, and I showed you Redcliffe, and I showed you the little inconsistency between the advisory circular as well as what's depicted in the app. And then we just had a look at how to avoid helicopter landing sites. Another type of helicopter landing site is what they call an instrument approach helicopter landing site. And what CASA have done is in their advisory circulars, they've said that they want basically the no-fly zone to be 3 nautical miles. In this case here, for a normal helicopter landing site, we could fly within 3 nautical miles, but we just had to land as soon as we became aware of a helicopter, but we couldn't land within that 500 meter radius. There's actually a whole bunch of different helipads or helicopter landing sites that do have this 3 nautical mile restriction, and a good example is Tully up in northern Queensland. And you can see too, it says that, well, actually it's a little bit inaccurate. It says your location is too close to a controlled airport. Well, Tully Hospital is actually not a controlled airport. There is no air traffic controller there. But what they're trying to depict is the 3 nautical mile restriction around helipads with their instrument approach landings, well, not instrument approach landing systems, but they're calling them instrument approach helicopter landing sites. So there's 2 in Queensland, there's a lot of them in New South Wales, and because they're very busy helicopter landing sites, that's why CASA don't want you anywhere near there. So you can see this is the 3 nautical mile ring around the hospital helicopter landing pad, and if we were to fly anywhere in that area, it says it's a no-fly zone. What I'll do now is I'll just pop up a list on the screen of the different helipads that have this 3 nautical mile restriction. And as you can see, it is a fairly small list. It's just the major hospitals that have a lot of helicopter traffic landing there. And we talk about an instrument approach helipad. What basically happens is the helicopter pilots, they can fly low level through clouds. They can get to quite low level before they pop out of the cloud and become what they call visual. And then once they're visual with the ground and with the hospital, they can land on the helipad. Now, because they're going to be in cloud to quite a low level, CASA obviously don't want any RPA or drones to be operating near that cloud base or near the helicopter landing site, because there may be very little time for the helicopters to maneuver away from and avoid a collision from a drone. Moving away from aerodromes, what we're now going to consider is restricted areas, and we'll have a look at some down near Brisbane as an example. This will help me quickly navigate there. Okay. And yeah, this is interesting. Like, it's talking about the Royal Brisbane Hospital. That's got a helicopter landing site, but it's not one of these 3 nautical mile restricted ones like Tully we just looked at. It's got the 500 meter restriction, but apart from that, we just have to land as soon as you become aware of a helicopter landing in that area. But to the south of Brisbane, a couple of other things I want to show you. First thing is this area here in red. This bit of area is what they call restricted airspace. Restricted airspace, it's a parcel of airspace that's restricted to any airspace users unless they've got a permission to fly through there from the controlling authority. And in this case here, Greenbank is used as a firing range for the Defence Force. Normal aircraft can't fly through there without, again, that permission from the controlling authority, and likewise RPA or drones can't fly in a restricted area without that authority. These restricted areas are depicted quite well on the app, and when a restricted area becomes what they call active, it'll be highlighted red. Active means, as the name implies, that the restricted area is active, it's being used. If a restricted area becomes deactivated, it's no longer in use, and this red shaded area will no longer be visible. So let's say you did want to fly in the Greenbank area, you drop your pin, it's getting the airspace information, and it says this is a restricted area, and it says you can't fly there. It doesn't give you a lot of information about the restricted area though. If we click this Learn More button, it doesn't tell us what the restricted area actually is. All it says is that, this is what different types of restricted areas are. But Greenbank is a firing range, and we do teach people on our course how to find out what the restricted area is, hours of operation, airspace limits, that sort of thing. Another good restricted area a lot of people don't consider is Sydney Harbour. So we're going to do a search down there in Sydney Harbour. You can see this is quite a busy bit of airspace, but it says this is a restricted area, do not fly here. So I'll close this, and you can see all that area has been shaded. And it's a shame, like if you were to fly around Sydney Harbour, it would be absolutely beautiful. It'd be a great place to fly your drone and get some stunning photography, but it's all restricted. And it's not just restricted for drones, it's restricted for normal aircraft. And the reason for that is as you can imagine, it's a very scenic area, and they've restricted the use of that part of the airspace to people that have got approval, and they're seaplane operators as well as helicopter operators. They've got permission from CASA to operate in that area. No one else can go in there. And I've tried this in a light aircraft myself one day. I hired an aircraft at Bankstown, wanted to fly low level around Sydney Harbour, but I couldn't get into the restricted area. CASA will only approve certain operators. Sydney's a complicated bit of airspace, as you can see. There are a lot of helicopter landing sites. You've got all this movement, the 3 nautical miles from the movement area at Sydney Airport. And the other interesting thing is they've depicted a bit of airspace called Victor 1. So if I drop a pin here, it tells me that do not exceed 30 meters or 100 feet. Now that's just advice. That's actually not depicted in any legislation or any other advisory circulars, but they're just giving you advice that there are low-level aircraft that can operate in this area. So you get a lot of helicopters that fly through here doing surf patrols, and you also get a lot of low-level aircraft flying along there, what they call Victor 1. And if a light aircraft flies along the coastline there at 500 feet, they avoid all the controlled airspace at Sydney. So you just need to be aware of those airspace users. If I scroll up, I can actually show you some other excellent things that the app does show you, and it tells you about any emergency services operations that are going on at the time. And the direction from CASA now states that you can't operate your RPA anywhere near an emergency services operation without the authority from the controlling authority. They haven't actually defined a distance though. They haven't said you need to stay 3 nautical miles or 1 kilometre or anything like that. They just said you can't fly near. But what the app has done, it's actually drawn a 3 nautical mile radius around any fires. So for example, if I was to click on it here, it's probably going to give me 2 bits of information. There we go. So it's telling me there's a fire. The perimeter trail, Duffy's Forest, it's under control, but it's a bushfire. What's interesting though is the app defines a 3 nautical mile ring, and the reason why they don't want you near the bushfire is, I guess there could be low level choppers that are operating in the area, as well as other fixed wing aircraft trying to control the fire. And basically there's been a lot of cases where drones have been flying in the area and they've had to ground the other aircraft as a result because they didn't want a collision. So CASA don't want you anywhere near it. What they've done is they've drawn a 3 nautical mile ring, but actually that doesn't comply with what's been issued to pilots in the form of what they call a NOTAM or a notice to airmen. Just popped it up on the screen now, but this is a NOTAM that's issued to all pilots, and it's something that we explain on our REPL course as well. But what it basically says is that any normal manned aircraft as well as unmanned aircraft can't come within 5 nautical miles of a bushfire just due to the all the low-level helicopters and everything trying to control it. You can't come within 5 nautical miles unless you've got authority from the person in charge. Now that 5 nautical miles actually differs a little bit to what's depicted in the app, so that's another good example of some of the little inconsistencies in the app and just something extra to be aware of. So going back to the app here, we've got the 3 nautical mile ring. If you wanted to be very compliant with the NOTAMs and everything out there, I'd give myself an extra couple of nautical miles. The other thing too is it is starting to show emergency services information, but it's a little bit inconsistent. Let's see if we can find out what this one is. So if I drop my pin here, yeah, it's telling me actually it's a fire alarm. So something's going on in that suburb. It's not an actual bushfire, so they haven't actually put a ring around that. But basically you shouldn't be flying near that because there's an emergency service operation going on at the time. So overall, a pretty good app, guys. I think it's good. I use it for a lot of planning myself to see what airspaces or airspace considerations there are. There are limitations. As we saw, there is a discrepancy around bushfires. We had a look at the approach and departure paths around non-towered aerodromes as well, and saw that what's depicted in the app's a little bit different to what CASA put out in their advisory circulars. But overall, it's quite good. What I don't like about the app is it's not actually a proper source of information, aeronautical information. It's not officially approved by Air Services Australia, who publish all the airspace information, so it's advisory only. If you do want to get some more information about airspace, such as controlled airspace limits, the names of any sort of restricted areas, you do have to go to aeronautical charts, or you can actually use an app called Oz Runways, and in particular the Oz Runways secondary app, Runway Check, which also depicts this sort of information. I'll cover that off in another video tutorial, and it's something we also go through on course as well.